This is Marcus Reid. Before we begin, subscribe, like and share, because today I'll tell you a story that proves the coldest betrayal isn't done by enemies in the shadows, but by the ones who once called you brother. Ethan Williams had always believed that blood was unbreakable. He grew up admiring his younger brother, Justin, not just as family, but as someone he would protect at all costs. Their father owned a small but growing construction company, one that Ethan poured his soul into maintaining after their father's health began to decline. Ethan worked long hours, running the business with integrity, loyalty, and deep respect for his family legacy, while Justin was known for his charm, ambitious nature, and hunger for success. Ethan thought that as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't face. But while Ethan saw brotherhood as a bond to protect, Justin saw it as a ladder he could climb, stepping on Ethan if he had to. As their father's health worsened, whispers began circulating within the company that someone would eventually take full control. Ethan expected Justin to support him, especially since he had been the one keeping the business alive. But Justin had a different vision, one where he alone stood in the spotlight. Slowly, Justin began planting seeds of doubt among the board members and employees, subtly portraying Ethan as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed by the pressure, and unfit to lead. Ethan didn't notice the shift. He trusted that Justin was simply helping where he could. Meanwhile, Justin was already building a narrative to replace him. When their father finally passed away, the company hesitated, unsure who would officially inherit control. Ethan believed his years of dedication would speak for themselves. Justin believed manipulation would speak louder. After his father's funeral, Ethan believed the next steps would be focused on continuing the company in memory of the one who started it all. He was emotionally exhausted but determined. Justin, however, saw this period of mourning as a perfect opportunity. He approached his brother with a false tone of comfort, saying he wanted to help him review documents, contracts, and financial transactions so as not to overwhelm him. Ethan, trusting the family bond, allowed full access. Over the next few weeks, Justin smiled like a supportive brother on the outside, while on the inside, he catalogued every number, every transaction, every vulnerable point in Ethan's management. He knew that at some point, he would need to turn that trust into a deadly weapon, and he was ready to use it at the right moment. Little by little, Justin became the rational voice within the company, while Ethan was seen as the man emotionally fragile from the pain of loss. And when people begin to believe someone is fragile, they are slowly pushed out without even realizing it. The first stage of the trap began with well-placed rumors. Employees began whispering that Ethan might not be mentally ready to lead, as some recent decisions seemed rushed. Justin always acted surprised, but never outright denied it, just saying things like, "He just needs time, I guess." That was enough to fuel doubt. In meetings, Justin would ask subtle questions that put Ethan in uncomfortable positions, appearing as if he simply wanted to help, but in reality, fueling the perception that Ethan wasn't confident in what he was doing. Even so, Ethan clung to the hope that his brother was there for him. He saw trust as a bridge between them. Justin saw this bridge as something that would need to be burned, just when Ethan was exactly where he wanted him to be, vulnerable, isolated, and unaware that he was about to fall into the void. Unbeknownst to Ethan, Justin had already decided that simply tarnishing his reputation wouldn't be enough. He didn't just want to drive Ethan out of the company. He wanted to destroy him completely, physically and emotionally, so that he would never have the strength to rise again. With full access to accounts and documents, Justin began moving small amounts irregularly, recording them as financial decisions made under Ethan's supervision. Reports were altered, signatures were digitally forged, and meetings were simulated via email, with Ethan supposedly approving transactions he never knew existed. Meanwhile, Justin discreetly fed the board information, indicating that Ethan might be struggling with emotional issues following his father's death, leading him to make serious mistakes. And since repeated lies in strategic settings begin to feel like truth, it was soon being informally mentioned that maybe Ethan was out of control. The trap took shape when Justin generated a massive embezzlement from the company, directing funds to an external account registered in Ethan's name, an account Justin had created in his name using previously accessed documents. The records revealed illegal transactions that compromised not only the company's financial stability, but also its market reputation. With everything prepared, Justin discreetly contacted board members and feigned devastation when presenting the alleged evidence. He used carefully rehearsed phrases like, "I didn't want to believe this. Maybe he's just lost control, but we have to protect the company." While everyone looked to Justin as the responsible and rational brother, the final plan was ready to be executed. Ethan would be exposed as a fraudster, removed from the company, criminally charged, and left alone to be destroyed by the law and social judgment. All this at the hands of the man he trusted most on earth. The collapse began on a seemingly ordinary day. Ethan arrived at the company ready to settle matters when he encountered strange looks and whispers that seemed charged with judgment. Minutes later, 2 police officers entered through the front door. Time seemed to stand still when they asked his full name and informed him that he was being arrested on suspicion of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and document forgery. Ethan could barely comprehend what was happening. He looked around for someone who could explain until he saw Justin in the hallway with an artificially distressed look. Justin ran up to him and said in a low, convincing voice, "Ethan, what have you done?" The sentence crushed Ethan inside, as it sounded like genuine shock to everyone present. And in that moment, with no way to defend himself, he began to believe that perhaps a part of him had indeed failed somehow without realizing it. At the police station, Ethan tried to explain that he had never signed fraudulent reports, never opened unknown accounts, never authorized any irregular transactions. But every document, altered email log, and prepared testimony pointed against him. Even company members he considered close began to distance themselves based on Justin's skillfully constructed narrative. His requests for a lawyer were granted, but the emotional damage had begun. During interrogations, it was mentioned that Justin had expressed concern about his brother's recent behavior following his father's death, making it appear that Ethan had lost control emotionally and committed illegal errors. With each twisted word, each fabricated piece of evidence presented, Ethan's trust in the world crumbled. He thought about how he had dedicated his life to the company, to his family, to the honor of the family, name that was now being tarnished in front of everyone. And as he was led to the temporary holding cell, the final image he carried with him was Justin, watching from a distance, with an expression that, for a brief moment, revealed something beyond the mask: silent satisfaction. It was at this precise moment that Ethan began to experience not only the fall, but the beginning of a reconstruction he hadn't yet known would be as profound as it was inevitable. The first days in prison were an agonizing mix of confusion, anger, and suffocating silence. Ethan repeatedly asked himself how something so terrible had happened so quickly, trying to find logic where only manipulation existed. The world outside the bars continued to spin, but his own had come to a screeching halt. Many of those who knew him chose to believe the accusations. Friends drifted away. Business partners severed ties. Social media spread headlines painting him as a greedy heir destroyed by his own corruption. And as, in so many cases of injustice, the truth seemed fragile in the face of the spectacle of lies. The worst part, however, wasn't the shame. It was the silence of the one person he believed would never abandon him, Justin. His brother didn't even show up to offer emotional support, even if it was fake. Instead, he allowed the public narrative to continue, cementing his image as a righteous man who tried to save the company from his brother's poor emotional decisions. During the long nights in his cell, Ethan would spend hours staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying every step of his recent life, trying to pinpoint when everything began to fall apart. And it was at this point that a painful but necessary realization hit him. Justin had never been loyal. It was Ethan who had always chosen to see him as better than he really was. The truth didn't immediately free him, but it ignited something within him. Anger ceased to be confusion and began to transform into clarity. He realized that if he continued to lament his downfall, he would remain grounded even if he were to leave prison one day. But if he embraced the pain as fuel, he could build something much greater than revenge, something that would restore him not only dignity but power. It was there, between cold walls and oppressive silence, that Ethan stopped being the betrayed victim and began, without realizing it, to become the man who would one day make Justin face the same emotional collapse, only awake, conscious, and with no possibility of escape. Time in prison ceased to be just a matter of counting days and became a kind of emotional laboratory. Ethan began to observe the people, the behaviors, the patterns of power within that place. He learned, unintentionally, that survival didn't depend on brute force, but on the ability to keep one's mind steady when everything around him tried to break it. He read books on business, psychology, self-control, and biographies of people who had been destroyed before, rising again. Slowly, his demeanor changed. He began to talk less, listen more, and analyze everything coolly. Guards and inmates alike noticed that he was no ordinary person. There was something about him that seemed to grow silently, as if he carried an invisible plan. And indeed he did. Not impulsive revenge, but the certainty that if fate gave him the chance to get out, he would rebuild his life. Not only to prove his innocence, but to expose Justin so precisely that every misstep his brother took would one day come back to crush him. Meanwhile, outside, Justin thrived. He took full control of the company and gained the trust of investors, presenting himself as the responsible heir who had saved his father's legacy from the collapse his brother had caused. His name appeared at events, interviews, and in powerful circles. He spoke proudly of the importance of difficult decisions to protect a family empire, portraying himself as a martyr who had to choose reason over emotional ties. But what Justin didn't know was that in every interview, in every speech, in every step towards success, he was sowing the seeds of his own downfall, because the higher he climbed, the more devastating the fall would be when the truth came out. Inside his cell, Ethan viewed the news not with hatred, but with understanding. Justin was building an empire on a lie, and every empire built on falsehood eventually falls. And when it did, Ethan intended to be there not to destroy it with his own hands, but to watch Justin crumble under the weight of his own guilt and the revealed truth. After nearly 2 years in prison, Ethan was no longer the same man who had entered. His innocent, trusting gaze had transformed into a steady, calculated, and serene gaze. He no longer expected mercy or believed in promises. He had learned that the only true justice was that which is built with patience. His good behavior earned him the attention of one of the prison supervisors, an elderly man named Raymond, who saw something different in Ethan. Raymond had worked there for decades and was rarely impressed by anyone, but something about Ethan, his discipline, his calm, his quiet intelligence, made him believe this man didn't belong there. It was he who recommended Ethan for an in-house rehabilitation and work program, something few achieved. Ethan accepted immediately, not out of hope of freedom, but because he felt that each new learning would be a tool for the future. He learned project management, accounting, small business management, and above all, how to understand human behavior in an almost surgical way. Without realizing it, he was becoming far more prepared than Justin had ever been. In his 3rd year, an unexpected turn of events occurred. A new lawyer sent by an NGO specializing in wrongful convictions revisited Ethan's case. The evidence presented glaring inconsistencies, and with the advancement of forensic technology, some electronic documents began to show signs of manipulation. The investigation was reopened, and within months it became clear that there were signs of forgery. Justin, now a powerful man, believed his brother's case was buried forever and was not even following the proceedings. Then, one cold morning, Ethan was called to the prison warden's office. He heard the words that would change his life. "Mr. Williams, the court has overturned your sentence. You are a free man." The sound of those words echoed within him like a mixture of relief and promise. Ethan didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't smile. He simply took a deep breath and calmly said, "Then it's time to start rebuilding what was stolen." And with that, he began the quietest and most dangerous part of his journey, the return. Leaving the prison, Ethan walked out the gates without looking back. The cold morning air hit his face as a reminder that the world had changed, and so had he. There was no one waiting for him. No welcome, no greeting, no hug. But he didn't need it. He no longer sought validation from others. Now he sought something far more valuable: control over his own story. With the help of the NGO that had supported his innocence, Ethan secured temporary shelter and legal assistance to start over. Instead of chasing the past, he quietly began building a new present. He used the knowledge he gained in prison to land a job at a small consulting firm, where he quickly gained recognition for his strategic skills and analytical vision. His sober gaze, his calmness, and his ability to silently understand people and situations earned him respect, even without telling his story. He didn't reveal anything about his past. He wore his scars like a piece of armor still being forged. As he slowly rebuilt his life, Ethan watched from afar as Justin prospered. He had become a household name in the construction industry, appearing in business magazines and at social events, and being praised for lifting the company out of crisis. But behind the scenes, Ethan realized something important. Justin was overconfident, surrounded by people who praised him not out of respect, but out of self-interest. He was the kind of man who now believed himself invincible, the kind who didn't see danger coming when it came quietly. Ethan was in no rush. He didn't just want to expose Justin, he wanted Justin to feel every step of his downfall the way he felt his own destruction. He knew that to bring down someone who built power through lies, it wasn't enough to reveal the truth. It was necessary to make them be destroyed by it. And so, while Justin accumulated power, Ethan accumulated something far more dangerous: knowledge. Ethan knew that to bring Justin down, he would need to deeply understand the empire he had built on deceit. He began working quietly with smaller companies, helping them restructure financially, always discreetly and with solid results. Soon, his reputation as a business strategist grew rapidly, not publicly, but behind the scenes. He became known among some private investors as someone who understood organizational behavior with surgical precision, able to spot hidden weaknesses and predict collapses before they happened. Ethan, now more mature and emotionally shielded, began to build connections with influential people, not through charisma, but through unquestionable competence. Meanwhile, Justin became increasingly visible, seeking public recognition and expanding the company with audacity but little prudence. He surrounded himself with sycophants, struck risky deals just to impress, and made decisions motivated more by ego than strategy. This constant need to assert himself as a grandiose leader made him vulnerable, especially to someone like Ethan, who knew not only the company's numbers, but also his brother's mind. At one point, Ethan was hired as a consultant by a group of investors who curiously were interested in expanding their business into the construction industry, the same sector Justin worked in. Without revealing his family identity or his past, Ethan began evaluating companies in the field, and so, for the first time since his arrest, he took a cool-headed look at the family company, now renamed under Justin's leadership. He found structural flaws, fragile contracts, risky partnerships, and a dangerous emotional dependence on his brother's ego. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply mentally recorded each vulnerability, because the downfall he was planning wouldn't be quick. It would be gradual, emotionally destructive, and inescapable, just as prison had been for him. Over time, Ethan gained the trust of key market figures, silent investors, strategic consultants, and entrepreneurs seeking stability in an industry where many were driven by ego. He didn't mention his past, never spoke more than necessary, and always delivered unquestionable results. His name, though not yet public, began to circulate among power groups as a sort of collapse solver. This gave him something crucial: indirect access to Justin's company's reputation. The first opportunities arose when investors began seeking detailed analysis of businesses controlled by Justin, suspicious of his strategic aggressiveness. And it was Ethan who began providing these analyses, always in a neutral, technical and impersonal manner, highlighting risks and patterns of mismanagement. He didn't attack Justin directly, he just let the numbers do the talking. And numbers, when mismanaged, always tell the truth someone tries to hide. Among the senior executives close to Justin, Ethan began reaching out to those who were dissatisfied with the way the company was run, not to recruit overt allies, but to understand who would be the first to abandon ship when it began to sink. Gradually, he realized that Justin had created a business environment based on fear and emotional manipulation, alienating competent people and valuing only those who fed his ego. This created a structural fragility. Without true loyalty, any financial instability could turn allies against him. Justin, at the height of his confidence, began signing international contracts that required more solidity than he possessed. Ethan watched every move with calculated precision, understanding that the right time to act would not be when Justin was weak, but when he was about to achieve something so great that the fall would be even more devastating, because he knew that, just as he had once stood on Ethan's shoulders, Justin was now building his success on ruins in disguise, and ruins, sooner or later, crumble completely, especially when someone starts removing the foundations, piece by piece, unseen. Ethan knew that Justin's downfall wouldn't begin with public exposure, but with small flaws that accumulated would raise doubts. He discreetly advised some investors on the hidden risks of the contracts Justin was about to sign, highlighting clauses that could lead to heavy fines if deadlines were missed, deadlines he knew Justin couldn't meet due to his lack of internal structure. When these investors began questioning Justin with specific, technical questions that exposed planning flaws, he became irritated, interpreting prudence as distrust. His arrogance began to show in meetings, damaging his image as a confident leader. At the same time, Ethan made small adjustments to market analyses, encouraging some strategic suppliers to seek stronger guarantees, which forced Justin to expose financial weaknesses that had previously been masked by optimistic projections. None of this was directly attributable to Ethan, but it was as if an invisible hand was pushing Justin toward hasty, emotionally reactive decisions. As the pressure mounted, Justin began to distrust the people around him. He constantly wondered who was working against him. Meetings became more tense, and executives sensed the change. Ethan, meanwhile, watched every move from afar, waiting for the right moment to make the next move, to reveal himself not as a victim returning in anger, but as a silent force he never anticipated. He knew Justin was beginning to feel something he had previously provoked in his brother, a sense of not having complete control, that something was about to fall apart without knowing exactly what. It was in this feeling of paranoia that the true emotional punishment began to manifest. Ethan was in no rush. The more Justin fought imaginary enemies, the less prepared he would be to face the real one, the one he believed he had buried forever. Ethan identified someone key in Justin's inner circle, one of the CFOs, Harold Bennett, known for being extremely professional but frustrated with Justin's impulsive and self-centered approach to running the company. Harold believed in structured growth, while Justin focused solely on visual impact and aggressive expansion. Ethan found him through a consulting firm where he operated under a discreet name and, without revealing his connection to Justin, exchanged ideas with him on management, corporate sustainability, and strategic risks. Over time, he became a respected voice behind the scenes for Harold, who began to realize that many of Justin's decisions were actually pushing the company to the brink of collapse. Without realizing it, Harold began to more firmly question the CEO's strategies in internal meetings. Justin, however, viewed any disagreement as a betrayal. This not only caused internal friction, but also planted the seed of distrust between him and his own team, just as had happened previously with Ethan, but now in reverse. With his pillars of trust beginning to fracture, Justin grew suspicious of everyone, even close allies. He reviewed messages, reopened old discussions, and grew uneasy with any suggestion that didn't align with his wishes. The leadership that once seemed solid now became unstable and emotionally reactive. Meanwhile, Ethan remained invisible, but his actions were already resonating clearly. He didn't need to say a word about his history. He simply demonstrated, through discreet strategies, that Justin had built an empire on fear, manipulation, and ego, and that any structure based on these things crumbles when loyalty is shattered. Justin's true punishment hadn't yet begun, but he was already feeling his world shake, and the irony was inescapable. Just as he had once watched Ethan lose everything, unable to understand how his life had been destroyed. So quickly, now he was beginning to feel the same sensation, only in slow motion, conscious, helpless, and surrounded by suspicions he himself could never prove. The first conscious emotional crack in Justin's mind occurred when he received a confidential analysis sent by a consultant known in the market only as EWW. The document described with almost surgical precision all of the company's internal vulnerabilities, unstable contracts, emotional dependence on power, flawed management, mechanisms and even observations related to how leadership manipulated the trust of others to maintain control. Among the coldly presented notes was a deliberately highlighted sentence: "Empires built on betrayal eventually collapse under their own lies." Justin read this sentence repeatedly. Something about the text seemed written by someone who knew not only the business, but the soul of those who ran it. When he sought more information about the consultant, he discovered that EW was a codename with no photo, no visible history. This began to erode his peace, as he couldn't tell if he was just an extremely competent analyst or someone who knew him deeply. Days later, an envelope was discreetly left on his desk during a late night at the office. Inside was just one sheet of paper, no logo, no signature, just one sentence. "Some things don't stay buried, Justin." He froze. The handwriting was extremely simple, but the impact was devastating. He felt his blood run cold. That sentence didn't come from the market, nor from meetings, nor from corporate adversaries. It came from the past, a past he believed he had killed when he destroyed his brother. For the first time since his rise, Justin felt the way Ethan had felt years ago, surrounded by doubts, unsure of who was against him, unsure of how much time remained before everything fell apart. But unlike Ethan, he knew exactly from whose shadow this threat might have emerged, and for the first time, he wondered, almost, whispering to himself, terrified, if Ethan was still alive, and worse, if he was coming back. Since receiving the letter, Justin had had no more restful nights. He began reviewing old files, searching for clues, reopening conversations, even closely observing everyone around him. The constant doubt gnawed at his sanity. Was Ethan really back? Had he been released? Or was this just a corporate enemy playing with his mind? However, the more he tried to convince himself it was just paranoia, the more the signs mounted. An anonymous call that remained silent on the other end. A car parked too long in front of the office. Nearby employees asking uncomfortable questions about the company's past. Even the mere sound of his name spoken in a hallway felt fraught with menace. Justin, who had once thrived on his brother's emotional downfall, now experienced for the first time the bitter taste of fear, not of losing money, but of losing the image he had built with so much effort and lies. Meanwhile, Ethan moved like a conscious shadow. He didn't need to hide, just remain silent, since Justin was now a prisoner of his own conscience. At a major corporate event, Ethan finally decided to reveal himself, not as a sworn enemy, but as an influential figure recognized by many major investors. When he took the stage alongside other strategic consultants for a brief presentation, Justin was in the audience, distracted and restless with dark thoughts. Upon hearing the presenter say, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the sharpest minds in strategic recovery, Ethan Williams." Justin's world seemed to stop. He stared at the stage in disbelief, his heart racing as if trying to escape his chest. Ethan walked calmly, with a complete absence of anger in his eyes, conveying something far more dangerous, dominance. He didn't look directly at Justin, but his mere presence there, alive, respected and stronger than before, was enough to shatter something inside Justin that would never be repaired. In that moment, Justin realized that everything he had built was about to confront the one thing he had never prepared to face: the truth. Justin tried to approach Ethan at the end of the event, but when their eyes met, Ethan simply walked past him without a word, as if looking through a man already condemned. That indifference was more painful than any direct confrontation. That same night, several investors began withdrawing proposals, citing a lack of transparency at Justin's company. One of them mentioned receiving anonymous documents that raised suspicions about long-standing irregularities, the very ones Justin himself had falsified to convict Ethan years earlier. Justin realized, with horror, that the past he'd tried to bury was being precisely excavated. He tried to contain the damage, but the more he tried to control the narrative, the more it became clear that something was wrong with the foundation of his story. Ethan, now working as a respected consultant, became part of a group that reviewed corporate contracts and subtly but legally helped question Justin's company's financial decisions. There was still no public proof of his original crime, but the market began to realize that Justin's brilliance was more gloss than substance. As he lost contracts and allies, Justin also began to lose emotional control. He began arguing with executives, yelling during meetings, and distrusting everyone around him. Small, independent investigations began to emerge, and former employees who felt wronged in the past now saw an opportunity to expose flaws in his management. Ethan never once uttered his name. He only continued to grow, becoming an influential figure whom many admired, exactly the kind of man Justin pretended to be, but never was. The irony was cruel. Justin had destroyed Ethan to become great, but now he would be destroyed by realizing that Ethan had become truly great without destroying him with his own hands. Only with the truth. And the most painful thing was knowing that when it all came crashing down, his name would not be remembered as a leader, but as a traitor. As the formal investigations began to intensify, Justin realized his downfall was already irreversible. The doctored documents he had created years ago to incriminate Ethan began to be reviewed by independent auditors, and the pattern of falsification left clear clues. Some of the board members, once allies, now distanced themselves, publicly declaring that they did not have full knowledge of the CEO's internal decisions. Justin tried to claim he had acted to save the company from his unstable brother, but no one believed the narrative anymore. The press, which had previously held him up as an example of family leadership, now questioned his past, investigated his rise, and reopened the case of Ethan Williams, the same man who was now seen as a model of resilience and competence. Unable to withstand the pressure, Justin lost. Control in a live interview, collapsing on camera when he mentioned Ethan as the shadow that never left. Some called him crazy, others a liar. But everyone realized that the empire he had built was crumbling, and there was no longer any leverage. Justin was forced to step down and faced further legal action for past fraud. Even though Ethan never stood up to accuse him directly, the pieces he left behind were enough for the truth to emerge on its own. When they finally locked eyes in a courtroom, Justin didn't see hatred in his brother's eyes. He saw something worse, resilience. Ethan didn't destroy him with screams. He destroyed him by proving he'd become a better man, untainted by the evil that once wounded him. At the end of the trial, Justin left defeated and alone, surrounded by the echo of the consequences he himself had sown. Ethan walked out of the building, breathing calmly. He didn't celebrate. He simply moved on, knowing he didn't need to continue that story. Because while Justin had lived to tear someone down, Ethan had learned to live to build himself up. And that was true victory. This was Marcus Reid, and sometimes the harshest justice isn't delivered by revenge, but by watching someone fall under the weight of their own betrayal.